maybe I'll just do the corporate route and that's how I'll be successful. And then seeing how easily that can all be taken away from you is really what pushed me towards real estate.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today on the Gentle Art of Crushing It show, where we focus on learning and sharing with our listeners all there is to know about how to create success in our lives. This show stands on the shoulders of giants. Our mission is to empower and inspire our listeners to create the life of their dreams whilst having a blast in the process. Let's celebrate life together. Welcome to the show.
All right, fantastic. Welcome back to another show of the Gentle Art of Crushing It. I'm super honored to have with us today Dan. Dan is more commonly known by his presence on all social media with the handle @ResilientREI. Dan is also the host of one of my favorite podcasts, the Resilient Real Estate Investing podcast out there. Awesome listen. Dan, welcome to the show. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. I am excited to get into talking about crushing it, and hopefully we'll be fairly gentle in doing so. Thank you so much for inviting me.
I love it, of course. Yeah, thank you for your time, and thank you for being with us today. So why don't we just kick this thing off? For those who don't know you, tell us who's Dan? What does Dan do in life? Tell us a bit about yourself, your background, kind of where you found success, and maybe include something interesting that most people do not know about you.
So that is a tall ask. I try and be as much of an open book as possible. So I guess for anybody who's not familiar with Resilient REI, it's my brand. I'm building a media company really to help the everyday real estate investor crush it. So people who are looking to buy their first deal or have a couple properties, even people who have a large portfolio but haven't shifted into commercial or self-storage, large-scale multifamily, at that range, you've got a different language, different objective. So that's kind of like the playground that I play in because that's what I personally find fascinating. So I own a couple rental properties in Milwaukee. I live in Chicago and am working on closing on a duplex here in Chicago so I can be a house hacker. So a lot kind of going on in the real estate space. I like to think that I'm doing pretty well. I feel like it's not really myself to say if I'm successful or if I'm really crushing it. I feel like that's something that's bestowed upon you. But I feel like I'm doing pretty well. And then you asked about, was it something that not a lot of people know about me? Is that the second half of the question?
Yeah, something interesting maybe that, most people don't know about you.
I would say that one piece that most people don't know about me would be that I'm an Eagle Scout. I did the whole Boy Scout
Very cool.
progression when I was growing up. Spent a lot of time, a lot of nights under canvas, as we say. And I feel like that really kind of set me up. Just kind of going through the progression of becoming an Eagle Scout. A lot of people view that it's a really hard thing to do, but for me and a lot of people I went to school with and my best friends, like we all just did it. And it's like, hey, you just do one thing at a time. You follow these rules, these steps, and eventually you become an Eagle Scout. So it kind of, I feel like that set me up for a lot of other things. It's just like if you do what you need to do, eventually you'll hit where you want to be.
How has being an Eagle Scout helped you with either your success in real estate or success in life in general? I'm curious if you have been able to draw parallels there.
I feel like there have been a couple jobs that I've been able to get, and being an Eagle Scout played some role. I don't say that I got any jobs specifically because I was an Eagle Scout, but that was certainly a talking point in a number of interviews that I've had. I think that when it comes to real estate and just some of the other stuff that I've done, it's trying to hold myself to a high standard and trying to be like, hey, I'm an Eagle Scout. I've done this stuff, so I need to be ethical. I need to accept a higher level of accountability and responsibility for what I'm doing.
Yeah, I love it. Awesome. And I'm curious also, because you said you live in Chicago, right? And you invest in Milwaukee, right? And for a lot of people, especially, it sounds like your audience, right? And the people that you're trying to talk to, right? Who are getting started, right? Like that investing out of state, right? And not being next to the property and not being able to go there, see it, touch it, fix it, whatever it is, right? Is a thing that scares most people in kind of getting started, and it turns into being an excuse for, well, I can't invest in real estate because in my backyard it just doesn't work, right? Numbers don't work or whatever. How do you end up, kind of going out of state?
That's a great question, and I spent about 5 years really examining real estate before. Well, I should say I've been in the industry for about 6 years, but the first 3 or so years, I got that all mixed up, was really me researching real estate and kind of identifying how I could actually get in the game and start buying properties. And so right out of college, I had no money and had to spend a lot of time learning how to budget, how to become good in my career, which is sales, and then also understand real estate. And so while I was doing that and really researching, I was with a friend of mine, and I was just like, hey, I'm really thinking about real estate. And he said, you should look at Milwaukee. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, you can buy cheap houses in Milwaukee. And we're from Chicago. So Chicago, for those of you who don't know, it's a pretty expensive market to be in. I mean, the average house is probably $300,000. Milwaukee, it's probably closer to $200,000. And I don't know why, but in the back of my mind, you can buy cheap houses in Milwaukee, just kind of stuck. And that became my default market. So whenever I was looking at it, I was always looking at Milwaukee. When I was planning out my team, I don't know, I defaulted to Milwaukee because it was an easier market to get into than Chicago.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. And how long would you say it took for you to build your team, right? Because that's always a big step that a lot of people talk about when you get started, right? I know for myself, I think it was like 7 or 8 months where all I did is, after I chose a market, was, building the team there. I'm curious how that went for you, or if that was part of those first like 5 years that you talked about.
So those 3 years of me really kind of setting the building blocks of being able to buy my first deal, I would say that, maybe 2 of them. But it wasn't really like me going out and interviewing everybody. It was just me like trying to understand the market and really networking. So it wasn't like I was going out and interviewing property managers or agents. It was just me trying to understand, where are the good places to invest in Milwaukee, what's the dynamics of the different neighborhoods. And you just kind of start meeting with people and just networking, and then the same names keep on kind of popping up. And we have a family friend who owns a couple houses in Milwaukee, and I got connected to him. And he said, you should work with my property manager. And so I interviewed a couple property managers, and I liked her the best. So I think that just network, right? If you want to invest in a place that you don't live or you haven't spent a significant amount of time, you're just going to want to talk to as many people as possible and see what names just keep on popping up.
Yeah, and the value of a referral, right, at least in my book, weighs a lot, right? It's very valuable to get like other successful individuals that have worked with these people to recommend them, right? Versus just finding a property manager on, say, Yelp or Thumbtack or Google or whatever, or Bigger Pockets for that matter, right? So that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, and I think that the
Very
other
cool.
element of that too. I was just going to say there's something that popped up on my Twitter feed that I thought was kind of interesting, and it was, do you take into consideration Google reviews for your property manager? And that kind of hit me because it's just like, I've always, when I'm looking at property managers and the property manager that I work with, I meet with them in person, I talk to them. I don't really spend a whole lot of time on Google reviews. And then I went, and it's like Google reviews for property managers, it's just, you can't make your decision off of that because so oftentimes it's people complaining or people, having a bad experience renting from that property manager for whatever reason can totally tank the review. So it's unlike if you're buying something on Amazon where Google reviews are really important. With a property manager, it's a little bit more nuanced.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I spent a little bit of time looking at reviews, Yelp and Google and whatnot. And what I found, when we were looking for our, property manager or, other team members, but specifically if we're talking about the property manager here, I just remember for most of them, the reviews are terrible, right? Because if you think about it, the property management job by nature, they're stuck between a rock and a hard place, and it's not great. They're stuck between tenants that need stuff, right? Fix this, fix that. This doesn't work. Where's my, my delivery, whatever it may be. And the other side, they're stuck, with the landlords and the owners who want more, faster turnarounds, more rent, fewer problems and all that. So they have a pretty crappy or at least tough job, right? So finding, good reviews on any, platform, Google, Yelp, or any other platform is very hard, right, for property management. So pretty tough. Dan, I'm curious if I shift the conversation here a little bit, because I'd love to hear about some of your favorite, or maybe your favorite success story, right, and what you've learned from that success story. But before going into that, I'm curious if for you over time, right, in the course of your life so far, right, if for you, like, the definition of success, if that has changed for you, if it meant something, 5 years ago, and if it means something different today.
Well, I would couch that in my life experience is not as long as other people's life experience. I mean, I'm going to be 29 in October. So, and then really taking real estate, really having that be a key part of my life has been about 5-6 years now.
Yeah.
So it's not like I've got decades of experience. So kind of a grain of salt. And I think that when I first started out in real estate, I thought that success was the door count, right? Like having as many doors as possible. You hear podcasts and you see people about how they've got 50, 75, a couple hundred doors, and you're like, wow, that is successful. Whereas right now, I don't really view success as the amount of doors. I view success as the amount of cash flow per door, or how successful each one of those doors really is. Because if you've got a whole bunch of cats and dogs in your portfolio, cash flow is not going to be great. You're going to be struggling. It's going to be a little bit of a nightmare to manage, right? Like if you buy a huge multifamily, it's like, great, you've got 30 plus doors. But if each one of those doors is a nightmare to manage, and in particular, like a 30 unit apartment is hard to manage anyway, because you can't have management on site. So I think that my perspective on success when it comes to real estate has shifted a little bit. So I don't care nearly as many as door count. I don't care as much about door count. I care how good each one of those doors really is.
Yeah, totally. And I think, there's a lot, especially kind of in the real estate investing space, right? The narrative that bigger is always better, right? And at least personally for me, I don't believe that. I tend to think very much along the same lines as you do, right? It's not a number of doors. It's like, for me, it's more about peace of mind that the portfolio that we have today is generating the returns that, we are looking for. And for it to do that without me being up at night worried about what's happening, right? Whether it be with the tenants or the profitability of that portfolio, that property, but it's just really peace of mind and returns, right? So yeah,
exactly. And
bigger is not always better,
for sure. And I mean, 5 paid off doors, right, in really great neighborhoods where you're making $1,500 in cash flow per month per door. Like that's life changing. You don't need 25 plus doors
100%.
to retire.
100%. 100%. Yeah, I love it. So with that, what's one of your favorite success stories that you like to share with others?
I would say that the first property, and I feel like this is kind of a common story with real estate investors, but that first door, the amount of work, the amount of stress, the amount of everything kind of culminating into buying that first rental property. I mean, it took me 3 years. Is really been has really been a nice feather in my cap as far as successes go. It took me 3 years. When I started it out, I was probably at the lowest point professionally. I was working for a company right out of college. I was one of the youngest sales guys there for a medical technology company here in Chicago. And long story short, that company ended up falling apart around me because the executives were committing fraud to the tune of a couple $100 million. Yeah, stealing money essentially, and I should say allegedly, because they haven't. Sure. It's been 5 years and they still haven't gone to trial. I think trial is sometime this year. So kind of couching it allegedly, trying to protect myself legally. Yeah, but it went from right out of college going into a situation where free lunches, free breakfast, multiple baristas on staff, kegerators, all this stuff, to all of a sudden it's people not showing up to the office, people showing up drinking all morning and then dipping out on a Tuesday, and then our sales manager coming in and basically saying, we can't be on the phones, we can't sell because anything that comes out of our mouth could be construed as coming from the company, and we just don't
Yeah.
want that liability. So that's kind of like where I started, and then going all the way up to buying that first rental property and being in a position to, put $25,000 on a rental property all in was a really powerful moment. And then that deal's been really good. It's done very well for me. Bought it for $99,000. It's renting consistently for $1,200. No real issues, no huge capex expenses, and it really hasn't been an issue to manage either.
Awesome. I have two follow-up questions to that one because I've heard this story a few times. I'm curious. The first one, maybe the easier one to answer, is how quickly after that first deal that apparently took you about 3 years to get, right, did you get the next one?
We ended up buying 3 that same year. So we closed on that in like February,
Wow.
and then the next one was pretty quick. It was probably early summer, and then we picked up another one in the fall. And so I think that the takeaway for people who don't have any rental properties, but they're really kind of thinking about it, is it will take years and a lot of frustration, a lot of sacrifices to buy that first deal. But then each one after that, it kind of comes in a lot quicker and a lot easier to do.
Yeah, totally. And that's what I was hoping you'd answer, because it's like that fairly typical story, right? And I don't know the physics behind this, but most of the energy, right, to take a plane from ground to the sky is spent at takeoff, right? And then once it's up in the air, then it's just cruising, right? And it's kind of similar here, right? It's like for us, for instance, I think it was 3 weeks after we closed our first deal that we had the second under contract, right? So it's like all that effort, you put it up front at first for the first one, and then you kind of get peace of mind. It's like, oh, I didn't die. This actually worked. Okay, great. And then, okay, let's look for the next one. And in all of this, in this, I guess 3-year journey to buy this first property, what would you say you learned in doing that? What was a valuable lesson?
I think that I needed to learn 3 things. And this is when anybody talks to me about wanting to get into real estate, wanting to buy rental properties, it's you really need to understand these 3 key things. Number 1, you need to understand how to make money. You need to understand how to save money, and then you need to understand how to multiply that money. And it's very kind of basic, but you need to be able to really drill down into each individual ones. Like for making money, I needed to get good at sales. So I'm a sales guy. That's my profession. So I needed to, how do I sell? How do I put myself in a company that is going to reward me for selling and is going to be not necessarily the easiest, but one that I'm going to be able to have some pretty good deal, sales through. So for me, I went and I was cold calling on the phone, eating what you kill. And that kind of burnt me out until I got into a situation where it's not one, you sell one person, then you're done, you're moving on to the next person. I'm a territory manager, so I manage the relationships with companies that regularly buy from my company. So from a sales perspective, it's different. I'm not trying to sell you right here, right now. I want to develop a relationship, understand, you and your business, so that way we can continue doing business together and you continue to buy from me. So that's just one example for making money. You have to understand how to save money. You can't live paycheck to paycheck. You can't become house poor. You need to understand, how do I save money? And I think that kind of parallels into the investment side of it, where you need to be passionate about where you're putting your money to work. And for me, it was real estate. And wanting to buy that first deal was such a key motivator. It helped me save money. It helped me get closer. And so that's kind of like what I would say for anybody. And it's easy to focus in on making money and then not focus as much on saving money or on analyzing 10 deals a day. Or for other people, it might be easier to focus on real estate, watching every podcast, analyzing deals all day, every day, but then struggle with money, struggle with saving money. So you need to the big takeaway for me is that you really need to research and pay attention to each one of those 3 factors.
Yep, couldn't agree more. Make more, save more, and then invest the difference, right? So
it's not complicated. It's not complicated, but for so many people, it's emotional, and you need just to be more practical with where you put your energy.
Yep, couldn't agree more. Yeah, you should get the kind of the emotions out of it as much as you possibly can, right? Well, thanks for sharing that success story there. And if I kind of flip it on its head here, would you mind sharing with us like an incredibly difficult experience that you've had in life so far, and maybe what you learned from that?
Yeah, I think that I would go back to that story that I mentioned with right out of college, working for that company
Yeah.
and kind of seeing it all fall apart, because that was really so pivotal for me in my professional career and what really took me down the road to real estate. To back up, in college, I had my own podcast called The Founders Report, where I was running around research, really putting the microphone in people's face that said that they were an entrepreneur, whether or not they actually were or were not. And I used that. It was a blast, and I used that to put myself in a position to get the best possible job after I graduated. And this company looked like it was the place to be. They had just raised the second most amount of money in startup history in Chicago at $550 million. So that was number two. Number one, if you're curious at home, is Groupon, which raised over $1 billion. And in Chicago, that's like unheard of. Like, I don't know, there would have to be a crazy company to be able to beat that. So really going into it, you felt like the wind was at the back. You really felt like you were working for like Facebook in year 2 or 3. Like I said, free lunches, free baristas. And for anybody who has not experienced that, it is kind of funny how you can get, you can get acclimated to that life, and having all those perks. You start complaining that the line for lunch, the lunch is too long and we only have sushi once a week. There was but the best was that we had 3 baristas on staff. They'd make you anything that you wanted, right? Like if you wanted a certain type of coffee bean, they'd go out and they get it. Cold brew, iced coffee, anything. They would make you anything. And it was amazing. But there was a guy on the sales team who was like, that coffee's too acidic. So he brought his own coffee maker, his own beans, like Folgers or like, some cheap kind of crappy
That's
coffee from the grocery store. Yeah, and he would make it, and so all of a sudden, like throughout the day, you'd kind of smell and you'd kind of hear it percolating, and then all the other sales guys will like come over and be like, "Oh yeah, this is so much better than the dark matter, whatever it is, $50 a pound coffee that we have there." So kind of that experience and thinking, I'm going to be at this company forever. I'm going to be, I'm seeing sales guys make $300,000-$400,000 a year. Nice clothes, nice watches, nice cars, really nice houses, and then seeing it all fall apart. Well, I don't think it wasn't a failure for me, obviously, because I was just so young and dumb that I was still living at home that I really had no skin in the game. I was only there for about 6 or 8 months. But seeing what I thought was corporate security and job security just kind of go up in smoke, and seeing people get burned and really jaded from that experience was really pivotal. And that's what took me down the path of there has to be something different. Because I saw the whole startup world, you're really running in a treadmill, trying to get to that next fund, really trying to get something off the ground, and how hard that is. Maybe I'll just do the corporate route and that's how I'll be successful. And then seeing how easily that can all be taken away from you is really what pushed me towards real estate.
And I'm curious if, and of course, if you don't mind sharing, right? But I'm curious, in that situation, did you walk away, or did it just like completely implode, and then it was basically everyone was out of a job, or something in between?
What ended up happening was, I forget.
And the only reason I'm asking is to see, like, where your mindset's at, like in terms of you started, going from this place where seemingly living the dream, right? All that free stuff, all that good stuff, the sushi, the coffee, and all of that, living the dream. This is going to be great. $400,000 a year, going to buy the nice house, nice car, all that stuff, to maybe realizing what's going on, and then having the presence of mind to say, like, I got to get out of here because this doesn't smell good, right? And I don't know if you had that presence of mind, right? That's why I'm asking, or if it's just, stuff happened and people were laid off, for example, right? And that was part of the learning experience for you. That's why I'm asking.
I've never talked about this, and I'm actually really, it takes me back. I should say, first of all, I was not making $400,000 a year. I was a BDR. I will say
totally.
that, but I was making I think $45,000 or $50,000 a year, and every appointment that I set was like a $50 spiff or something. But it was wild. It was so crazy how it all just fell apart because, let's just say, I forget what day it was, but let's just say it was a Tuesday. I was at a press conference with the then mayor of Chicago and the founders at this beautiful brain spanking new building that they were going to be building. Like I think it was going to be the largest office lease in River North in Chicago. So if you're familiar with Chicago, River North is like the nicest place to be when it comes to offices. Okay. Like it's the trendiest spot. And they were going to take like 10 floors in this building. So the mayor of the city of Chicago stood on stage, press conference, the whole kit and caboodle, local TV cameras and everything, and said, "So goes this company, Chicago, whatever it was, like Chicago, so goes as wherever this company goes." Basically saying the success of Chicago is based on this company, this bright spankling company, and which was very, very, very profound. And then the next day, I stood up for forever. I think I heard something from my computer, and kind of where I was at, I was like a little bit kind of like an island almost. Like the sales guys were a couple rows ahead of me, so it was like me and my senior account executive. I stood up, and there was like 60% of the people were gone. And I looked over at my senior account execative, and this is, like I said, this is the second day. This is the day after that press conference, and he had his head in his hands, and I was like, "Hey, did we miss a meeting? Like, were we supposed to be somewhere?" And he said, "They all got laid off." And I didn't understand it. I thought he was joking because that's just kind of the relationship that we had. And I remember I said, "Good, we deserve some time off. We've been working so hard," or whatever. And he's like, "No, Dan, they are gone." And so it was kind of like the way that this company was built. There was like regular town halls, and it was really kind of like a church. So there's like really this cult within the company around the executives, like the leadership team, that they could do no wrong. They were a genius, right? Like yada, yada, yada. Mm-hmm. And so over the next couple of months after that big layoff where they laid off like 20% of the company, there were people who were like, "We got screwed by these people," and then having other people saying, "No, you can't read the press," like yada, yada. It's all fake news. And so there's just that dichotomy that was really, really ugly. And so for probably like the next 2 months, it was circling around before you go to the office, seeing if there were going to be, police cars or something, because we were all told that if you're going to do a huge layoff, you need to have police there to make sure that nothing crazy happens. So there were times when there'd be like police cars outside because it's Chicago, and people come in, they'd be freaking out, and nothing would happen. So it was kind of like, there was a whole bunch of like, I don't know, we thought that there was going to be a next layoff. Like we were all waiting for the next shoe to drop. And so a couple weeks, maybe it was a couple months, we all got pulled into the conference room, and they said that we've got a voluntary severance package. And if you don't take this, we're going to have to do another round of layoffs depending on how many people don't take this. So you better take it. So I ended up taking it. I think it was like 2.5 months of severance. And then pretty much everybody,
story, man.
Yeah. Wow. And then pretty much, so they ended up going from like 300 or 400 people to maybe like 30 or so when it was all said and done. Okay. So.
Wow.
I don't know if that answers your question, but it was a wild thing to live through.
Well, exactly. Yeah. And I imagine going through that, you have learned a lot, whether, explicitly or just implicitly from having, experienced it. It must be pretty crazy. So if I shift gears a little bit to move away from that particular story, I'm curious if you were able to go back in time, either as, I don't know, teenager, younger adult, whatever, what would you do differently to kind of maybe fast track your success or get you closer, faster to where, let's say, you want to be today? What would you do different?
If I went to myself in high school and I had no idea what I was going to do, professionally, my whole deal was I was going to run track and I was going to go to the Olympics, even though I had no business to have that dream. But I don't know. I feel like every guy who's like at least relatively athletic, like that's the dream. But I would have gone to him. Yeah. So what I would have done is I would have gone to him and said, "You're going to love this thing about real estate. Here's why you're going to love it. Go to college, but get a real estate license, and then go and try and sell houses." Right? Like that's probably what I would have done. I feel like Graham Stephan, for everybody who's like familiar with Graham Stephan on YouTube, that's like kind of the route that he took. He didn't even go to college. He just was like, I love real estate. I'm going to become an agent, and then kind of cut his teeth doing that. I would have done that. I feel like I would be a little bit further ahead than I am now. But hindsight's 2020.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm curious when, because you obviously talked a lot previously, right, about how you networked for a long time, right? You were trying to meet people, talk to people, building that team, kind of getting into this real estate thing, right? And obviously you've gone through a lot. Sorry, you just shared with us, right? And you've now reached the point where, at least in your own definition, you feel, pretty successful, right? And I imagine, when you bump into people, talk to people, meet new people, right? You must sometimes, I'm sure, stumble across these people that are maybe, glass half empty versus, glass half full. Like, life is happening to me. I can't control this. I was dealt this hand of cards, so it is what it is, right? What's your secret, Dan's secret to kind of help those people get from that, glass half empty kind of mindsets to glass half full, and you can do this, and it's a life of abundance and all of that? I'm curious because, seemingly you've gone through some of that yourself, right, with what you're telling us. So I'm curious if you have a secret.
I do, and it's literally called The Strangest Secret in the World. When I was in college, I stumbled upon the audiobook. It's really not even a book, it's a pamphlet by Earl Nightingale called The Strangest Secret in the World. It was recorded in like the 1950s. He's got the most amazing old school smoky radio voice. But the whole premise of it is that you become what you think about. So if you want to become successful in real estate, you need to think all day, every day about real estate and how you're going to become successful at it, and about deal analysis and why that deal would work and why that deal wouldn't work. It's really easy to do. I mean, listen to podcasts, watch YouTube videos, read books. There's ways that you can kind of hack it to a certain degree where you're constantly thinking about that subject. And what's so powerful with that, with his theory, is that you will become what you think about, but the problem is that most people think about nothing. And so you become nothing.
Yeah.
And if you're always negative and you think that these things just happen to me, life is always hard for me because this or that reason, then it will, because you are thinking it and you think it into fruition. Whereas for me, it's like with those 3 years of leading up to buying my first property, like there are all these things that knocked me off course. I had to change jobs, all this stuff. But I kept on thinking about the same thing, which is that I want to buy rental properties. I will become successful at buying rental properties. I will be able to retire eventually off of rental properties. And so in order to get that, I need to become better at sales. I need to figure out how to save a little bit more money. I need to understand what is a deal and what isn't a deal. Kind of going back to, you need to understand those 3 key factors. And it sounds very basic, but the problem is that most people don't think about them, which means that they don't become good at them. So you need to become at least decent at all 3 of those. The problem is that most people are okay at one and then are pretty miserable at the other 2.
Yeah. And would you say that's still the mindset you're in today, or do you shift, like where it's like when you're in your sales job, that's all you think about to be successful there, to make more and then save more and invest more, right? And then maybe when you're done with the W-2, you just shift your mindset and you're all real estate? Or is it more I don't know, maybe nebulous or organic now? I'm curious how that mindset is for you right now.
I really try and focus it on what would give the highest returns. So with my job, there's a particular buying season where most people make their buying decisions, and it's maybe 3 or 4 months, and that's when you make most of the money in the business. So that's when you go all in. My focus is on this because this is critical. Versus with Resilient REI, what I'm doing on the podcast side and all that, it's okay. I need to focus on how do I make really good content? How do I grow my presence? How do I provide the most value? That is my focus. So I think that you need to kind of focus on key elements. And the problem with so many people is that they'll go to work and then they'll listen to a podcast on stories or comedy or something. And that's great, but you're not focusing on one thing. You're kind of focusing on nothing when you really think about it. Nothing that really helps propel you forward, that helps get you to that next objective. So that's what I try and do, is I try and police my thoughts and really hone in on one particular aspect, because I know that there's great returns to be had if I'm able to achieve this, if I'm able to have a great buying season, if I'm able to really knock this particular podcast out of the park. If I've got, the money right and I'm looking to buy a deal, I really need to make sure that I buy the best deal possible. So that's kind of how I take it now. But that's also because I spent 3 years of thinking about nothing else, and I kid you not, nothing else but real estate. And that really helped build up that baseline to where I don't need to do that so much anymore, because I've got so many things that have already been kind of worked in. I understand the market. I've got the team. I understand what a deal and what isn't a deal. So I don't need to spend as much time and mind share on that.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah, totally makes sense. Yeah. I remember when I was at that place where everything was real estate in my mind to get me off the ground, like you were just saying, right? Awesome. Well, I want to be mindful of your time here. I got a couple more questions here, I think, and then we'll let you out of here, Dan. Thanks again for your time. But do you have a book recommendation for the audience, something that's helped you find success or helped you just in life in general? And we'll, again, as always, we'll make sure these are in the show notes, as well as all of Dan's contact information and whatnot. But book recommendation.
One Rental at a Time by Michael Zuber. I'm a huge fan of the work that Michael Zuber does. If you're not familiar with Michael Zuber, you should just check out his YouTube channel, One Rental at a Time. He does the amount of content that guy does is just insane. You would think that he works for like a national broadcast or something. It's like 4 or 5 plus videos, all on real estate every single day. But he wrote a book, One Rental at a Time, and it's really about his journey in real estate to the point where he's got about like 180 plus doors. I guess kind of going back to door count doesn't really matter, but he's such a great investor. Those are great deals. To 4, right? Yeah. And so thank you for mentioning that, because his whole book is, how he was able to work a W-2, invest in real estate, and how his mind says that you don't need, like he has 180 plus doors, you get to 4, and you're really able to change your entire financial future, because you could stay at 4, have 4 paid off rental properties, and that's a huge supplement to your income in your retirement. Or if you've gotten to 4, you know essentially how to get from 4 to 10 to 20 to so on and so forth. So highly underrated book, and I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Excellent book. His second book as well, was it 15 Conversations with Real Estate Millionaires? I'm looking over here to my left because I have both of them on my bookshelf. Awesome.
I've got them too. I've got them somewhere back there for anybody who's watching the video.
Yeah. Yeah, and the YouTube channel is fantastic. So it's a go-to of mine every single day, because he also does like the daily financial news, right? That's like
so good.
Consumer finance / very real estate heavy. One of my favorites. Awesome. Well, yeah, that's a great recommendation, Dan. Thanks for that. What about a piece of, like a tool or a piece of technology that you use on a regular basis that you say helped you kind of achieve success?
Twitter. I love Twitter. I am such a Twitter nerd. Yeah. And I think that what's so great about it is that you can really dive into a certain community. So for me, for anybody who's not familiar, it's Retweet. So the real estate side of Twitter. And I've met so many just incredible people who are more than happy to give back, to share their insights. And it's just so wholesome. I mean, there's so many other corners of Twitter that are really negative and really toxic, but the real estate side has just been fantastic. So for one example is I'm working on a house hack, and I know that I'm gonna need to replace AC units. So I just put out a tweet and said, hey, I'm working on a house hack duplex. I need to replace AC units. Like, what is a reasonable amount of money that I should be quoted at for AC units? And I got like 40 people reaching out. Anybody saying anywhere from like 2,500 to, I think one person said like 12 or 13,000. But it's just, so I guess but within that range, right, it kind of helps you set expectations. But
it's still more, like to your point, right? It's more information than you had before tweeting that, right? So at least you have that information to put things into context.
Yeah, and you're able to say, okay, so 2,500, and then people are saying, well, it all depends on the tonnage, and I had no idea that tonnage was used with air conditioners. So it's a wonderfully underrated tool.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And again, Resilient REI on Twitter, right? Fantastic follow. So I'd recommend everyone go there. So bringing this to a close here, Dan, how can our audience support you, connect with you, reach out to you if you so wish? Plug your podcast again. Where can they find it? How can our audience help?
Sure. And Nathan, thank you so much for inviting me on the show. Really, really appreciate it. As a fellow podcaster, I know that these shows take a little bit of a pound of flesh sometimes, so I appreciate you thinking of me. So Resilient REI is my handle: Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. We've got our own podcast called Resilient Real Estate Investing, and my belief is that when you hear what people are doing within their space, within real estate, it can be really powerful. So what I try and do is I try and find the best possible people within the real estate space, whether it's long distance investing, BRRRR, short-term rental, wholesaling, just to hear what they are doing and what they're finding success with, and just sharing it with the community. Yeah. So we just had Shane Wallen, who's the head strength and conditioning coach for the Detroit Tigers, on talking about how he was house hacking and how he got to start in the NFL and how he was able to pair that with real estate. So if you want to check that out, Resilient Real Estate Investing is the podcast, and Resilient REI on all social.
Awesome. Yeah, it is one of my favorite podcasts as well. I listen to it every week. I also love was it Tuesdays or Thursdays that you do the Twitter lives that end up being a podcast as well. So always great content, Dan. So Resilient Real Estate Investing Podcast. Love it. Any last parting words, Dan? I want to be mindful of your time. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Parting words. I'm just hoping that we start lowering interest rates. That the Fed starts lowering interest rates. As somebody who is working on putting together a loan for a house hack, that's the vibes that I'm sending out there in the universe. How about that?
I love those vibes. So we'll leave it at that. Dan, again, thank you so much. Everything will be in the show notes. Appreciate your time, Dan. Thanks a lot, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Awesome. Thank you, Nathan.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Another episode of The Gentle Art of Crushing It. It was an amazing episode. We know we sure learned a lot, and we hope you did as well. We want to take a second and thank you so much for viewing or listening to this episode. And please just know that we only ask for one favor, and that is to make this life magnificent. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.